Oops. Some network problems. Hello. I hope
wants to join us. Hello, everyone. My host is missing. Hello, Surya.
we're waiting for Golda. Hello, Golda.
Hi. Good evening.
Yeah, sorry, I had my speaker was on mute. I was wondering why I can't hear you.
Okay.
So, welcome, and just to introduce Golda, she's an author of several books, the Iban trilogy of Iban Dream and Iban Journey and Iban Woman. And I have read Iban Dream, which I got about 2 years ago, and I'm a big fan. And looking forward, I have not read, but the science fiction from what I have seen is very interesting as well. So she writes science fiction. She writes about Iban culture. It's most of it is fiction, I suppose. And Golda, so nice to have you here with us today. And
Thank you for having me.
thank you. To start with, please tell us more, because most of our audience would not know much about Iban culture, and so it would be great if you could just introduce us briefly to the Iban people.
Okay. Um, the Ibans are a group of tribal people found in Sarawak, which is on the island of Borneo, for those of you who do not know. In Sarawak, we have a big group called the Dayaks, and the Ibans are one of the sub-ethnic groups. Um, they're, they're famous for being headhunters. But actually, in our own culture, we consider traveling as equally important. In fact, we have a culture called Bejalai that a lot of the Iban men still practice today. Um, so I started writing Iban Dream because I grew up reading Iban stories and Iban folklores, but they were all in the Iban language. And as I grow older and I was introduced to other cultures like Greek mythology, Roman mythologies, and all that, and even the Celtic ones, I begin to realize that our Iban stories are just as rich. But there was very few stories about Ibans that were written in English. So around the 1990s, while I was studying in Japan, I began to realize that um, there was a way to introduce my culture to the world and make their stories on an equal footing with the rest of the other myths and legends that you can find in most of the mainstream culture. Studying in Japan had actually shown me that there is a way to make your culture relevant, to make it exciting, and to modernize it. And that is what I was trying to do when I wrote Iban Dream. When I first started writing it, I was expecting to write just one book, you know. But as I got into it, I started to realize that there was more stories that I need to write. And so the one novel become a series of 3 novels, and also some children's stories along the way. Mm.
I was reading somewhere on the net in an interview of yours that there was a particular Hollywood movie that disturbed you to and provoked you to write. What was that all about?
Oh, it was it was quite an important movie for Sarawak. It's called The Sleeping Dictionary. One of the actresses, the main actress, was actually Jessica Alba. So, in Sarawak terms, I guess it could be called a blockbuster. Um, but for me, I was really disappointed because of the way the Iban woman was portrayed in that movie. I mean, for one, it was about a white man, an Englishman who came to Borneo, and then he was given a lady was sent, an Iban lady was sent to live with him to teach him the Iban language. And the idea was that if she could form a relationship with her, then he'll be able to learn the language better. Um, of course, they show it as a love story, but the way it was done was so wrong because in the Iban culture, women are very proud. In fact, a woman who forces herself on a man is accused of what we say nama kediri, as in forcing yourself into his life, and that is considered as her degrading her self-worth. Because women in the Iban culture are so proud that we believe it's the men who should come and look for us, and it is us who has the right to deny them. You know, so for her to insist on forcing herself at the man, in the sense like she went to his house and he rejected her because he was saying like, you can't live with me, I'm a bachelor, you can't live with me. But she insists and she forced herself into his home and became part of his life. And that was like, when I first saw it, I was so shocked. I was like, what? Who approved this? Who says that this is how an Iban woman should be? But of course, along the way, they showed that she's a beautiful girl. I mean, beautiful with a handsome man, and that they should fall in love and all that. I mean, there was a lot of excitement about the movie at that time. But I do have a few Chinese friends who thought that it was strange. Like they would come to me and they'll say like, we know, we sort of sense that something was off about this movie. And they were like saying like, I mean, we know you as an Iban woman. I mean, we've met a lot of other Iban women, and I can't imagine any one of you being like that, So, yeah, that movie was really disturbing in the sense like it was well, I hate to say this, some white man's wet dream, I guess, but we become the object of that. So it was rather degrading for me. I was quite mad about it, and a few of the other Iban women I've met who've seen the movie were also quite mad with it.
In fact, we have had many similar situations, like experiences here, particularly with the dominant community of India, the Brahmins. Their films on the indigenous people have always been something similar, be it the celebrated filmmaker Satyajit Ray's Aranyar Din Ratri, or a particular Odia filmmaker here who is quite well known. His name is Prashant Nanda. He made a film called The Living Ghost, which was about Niyamgiri. And in that, it was extremely horrifying. I could never see that film, but what I I think there's some network problem, so it's kind of So it seems like that's quite a thing that happens to indigenous people across the world. I mean, from Sarawak to Orissa to I'm sure, I mean, of course, we have seen how Hollywood has appropriated Native American culture all along. And,
Mhm.
for most of the history of cinema, the Native American people were always shown as people coming, raiding the
Um,
white man's village. Uh,
mm,
so the same thing we see in literature as well. I mean, in Indian literature, particularly where the indigenous people have always been demonized, as in the Indian epics of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, it's
mm,
mostly about the indigenous people versus the settlers back in the day, about 3,000
mhm,
years ago.
mm.
So uh, now, with such a long history of demonization of indigenous practices and culture, uh, how do you like fight that? Like, because every practice has been shown in a terrible manner.
And the props are always the same. I mean, one of the things is that no matter where they are around the world, I mean, when I saw this new movie that came out, I think it was called At the Edge of the World or something like that. I mean, it sort of made me laugh. I mean, I could finish the whole movie because it was so typical of how they show indigenous culture. I mean, you have a group of people dancing wildly around a fire, and then you have bows and arrows attacking, people shooting bows and arrows attacking people in a boat. And that is so strange because in Sarawak, I've been to quite a few longhouses. I don't see longhouses with bows and arrows on their walls. We I don't know of any Dayak group. Maybe the Malays would use bows and arrows, but I don't know of any Iban or Bidayo in Sarawak here who uses bows and arrows to hunt or for war. We use blowpipes. That's as far as I know. And yet this movie showed them using bows and arrows. Um, but then, of course, I wasn't clear about who the perpetrators were. So maybe they could just say, oh, it was Malay attackers or something like that, But then again, I must admit that I didn't finish the movie because it was pretty unwatchable. So one way I think that we can, change people's perspective or make people more aware is by doing this kind of talks. And right now, another thing I'm trying to do is to try to persuade indigenous people to write their stories, whether in the form of children's stories, whether in the form of scripts, whether in the form of blogs. Just put it out there, make people aware, because awareness is going to make people more perceptive in the sense like, you have all these different cultures around the world. Why do we need to homogenize them? For example, like just because you saw one culture of people dancing around a fire doesn't mean that all indigenous cultures, dance around a fire. I mean, for us, it's not, yes, we dance around something, but we dance around, what do you call that? Those sacred trunks that they would put up, and they'll hang sacred things around it, to symbolize the human hate. We would dance around that, but we wouldn't. So far as I know, we don't dance around a fire. Maybe for a shamanic practice, but I've never seen a shamanic practice that does that. Mm.
Right. Sorry.
I thought I lost you.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yeah. So, like, how does one really deal with it? Because all these, I mean, every practice is so demonized. So when a writer writes, it's you just have to, face these years and years of conditioning by the colonizer groups of
Mhm.
presenting people. And this other thing that I always see is that indigenous community is often perceived as a community that has to be like in a particular costume or in a like in a nature's child sort of a thing. And
Mhm.
That's also like an image. Anything else is seen as not being really indigenous kind of a thing.
Mm.
So I mean, there's so much to face. Like, how do you really go
Well,
about this?
it, for culture, it's a little bit difficult. I mean, for the way we dress, for our costumes and all that, it's a little bit difficult because over the years, for hundreds of years around this area, we've been doing a lot of trade. So we do assimilate the style of different cultures. For example, like in Sarawak nowadays, we have something called the tango. It's like a beaded yoke, you know. That idea is actually within last century. Maybe they got the idea from the Chinese or from the Malays, But previously, Iban women didn't wear those things. But of course, nowadays, because it's vibrant, it's colorful, we do wear them. Those are the beaded yoke that we have over our shoulders. Um, but for me, I think the best way to try to change people, to try to make people understand their culture better, is through books and true stories. Maybe because that's my area of expertise. Because I feel like, for example, like myself, I mean, I grew up in town. I didn't grow up in the longhouse. Um, so for me, when I was a teenager, the Iban culture itself was quite familiar because my grandmother does train me on those taboos and superstition. But the problem is that as I become a teenager, when those children's stories become too simple for me, I began to see my culture as something simplistic, as in unsophisticated, as in incomplete. So if I want to make myself more intellectual, I felt like I need to adopt another culture. Um, but as I get older and as I become exposed to more complex literature by the Dayaks, especially by this Sandin Benedict, because he had written quite a lot of stuff about the Iban culture, and also books that were produced by the Tun Juga Foundation. As I have more access to these materials, I began to realize that my culture is actually very complex and very sophisticated. So I think in my case, I believe that my responsibility in the first place is to try to show people that um, I can write, I can write good, modern, relevant stories using my culture's folklore. And I feel that everyone who wants to promote their culture must think of a way to show their culture as something that the mainstream can accept into their lives. Because right now, what happens is that a lot of people just put it up as something that is traditional. For example, like we only dress a certain way once a year, or something that should be put in a museum, like antiques, you know, um, or um, or family heirlooms that you can't touch. You can only dust it. You can only revere it. I don't want my culture to become like to end up like that, because that's what happened to the ancient Greek cultures. You know? So they lost a lot of their identities because that is what they did to the culture. They just put it into the museum and expect people to appreciate it. But nowadays there's a new movement that is trying to bring back those cultures, like trying to understand their music and all that stuff. And that is what I want to do with the Iban culture. I don't want it to end up in a museum. I don't want it to just end up in the school books. I want people to be able to live with it, like maybe have it as part of their entertainment, whether it's in the form of movies, animation, or books. You know, have it as part of their life, in the sense, like, for example, yeah, we don't use all those fantastic costumes, but maybe we can have batik prints, or like the sarongs, printed sarongs with the Dayak motifs. That is what I want to see. And the movement is slowly starting here in Sarawak. I do see young people starting to dress up in Dayak motifs or wearing necklaces, modern necklaces with Iban motifs and all that. So yeah, I feel like this new generation will bring the culture back to life. And but if but I also want to make sure that the culture that comes out from this is something that the Iban people created themselves. I don't want, for example, like some people have very good intentions, but they may not be familiar with the Iban culture totally, but they sort of have an idea, so they feel like, oh, we should do it like this, we should do it like that, and maybe then it become popular. There are a lot of people with good intentions who are like that, but I would like to see the Iban youth themselves, the Iban people themselves, take control of their culture and interpret their culture into the modern age. That is what I want to see.
Thank you. That was really helpful. In fact, in our context here in Odisha and India as well, particularly. And yeah, so we have this thing of there's a lot of glorification and on one side there is this demonization of, or rather, simplification, generalization of indigenous culture in mainstream literature. And on the other hand, we see there is this glorification and romanticization of colonial culture. Like in India, we see everything almost all of historical fantasy kind of. Like we had a Shiva trilogy or something like that, and so all of these are again kind of reinforcing old stereotypes, old prejudices, and so there's this constant new, the colonial apparatus is always churning out new, material, which is quite overwhelming. How does one, like in that clutter, how does one manage to, because I guess the big publishers and the big marketing agents, the book agents, would be all promoting that sort of stuff. So how do indigenous writers, I'm not asking for like a solution, but yeah.
No, I am still struggling with that actually, because yes, I have written 3 novels, but my work are considered very niche. So there are very few publishers that will publish my work, because it does not follow a typical sort of storyline, and for example, I had some people who complain like there is not enough magic or flying or exploding stuff inside my stories, and the reviewer said that it's an Asian story, it's supposed to have all those things, and I was like, what? I was thinking like, but that is Chinese and Japanese, that is not Iban, in the Iban culture, we believe that magic do exist, but that magic exists in the dream world, because we believe that the dream world is real. So yes, we do believe in things like dragons and monsters, but we believe that they exist in dreams, not in the real world. So when people come and talk with us, they'll find it a bit strange. How is it that you can believe in something and then on the other hand believe that it doesn't exist in the real world? Because we believe that the dream world is real, you see. So there are a lot of these misconceptions that goes around, and because of that, the kind of stories that I write is difficult for a lot of people to appreciate because it's like you are almost in the fantasy format and yet you are not quite there, you know. So of course I do try to write in the fantasy format as much as I could because I feel like that's it. Um, that is the way that people used to tell their stories in my culture. I mean, we love to have have gods and monsters fighting each other or fighting with humans or giving advices to humans. Um, I believe a lot of indigenous cultures does have that, but the problem now is that the world seems to have an idea of how fantasy is supposed to look like, and my stories do not fit into that worldview. So I do still struggle with trying to persuade people to read my work because a lot of people say like, no, we're not into your kind of story, you know. However, I've also had a lot of readers of Iban descent who would write back and say that they really appreciated my stories because it felt um, it felt very homey, very comfy for them. It's like it's something that is so familiar to them, you know, like something that they couldn't find anywhere else. And it's also a piece of home that they can put in their pocket or in their shelves and show people all the time. So um, yeah, I don't think it's going to be an easy battle to fight, but I do believe that change is coming because the new generation is more exposed to information. I mean, you can even get free documentaries on places like YouTube or a lot of other video streaming services. I mean, you can watch all those things for free. And because the people who do those documentaries or those news are not tied to any particular group, so they can show what they want to show instead of what some big group says will make money. You see, so um, now a lot of the youngsters are getting more and more exposed to all these different ideas and different cultures and different writing styles, different storytelling styles. So I feel like the change we need is within reach. Hopefully, in our generation we will be able to say, I really hope so, but I do see the change is coming because before this, what I see is that people try to homogenize everything. It's like, yeah, you're from South America, you're from Sarawak, but they try to mash us up into this one single thing. It's like tribal is one culture. So they've actually turned the word tribal into um, a very bad word, in the sense like everyone have to be like this if they want to be considered as tribal. So I really don't agree with that. I mean, we are all so different, the way we think, our philosophies. um, Even within Sarawak itself, even though we have different groups among the Dayaks, I mean, there are some groups that are aggressive, like the Iban. They would go head hunting, they would assert themselves. It doesn't matter what your age is, everyone has a right to speak. And then there are the quieter, shyer groups like the Punans. They try to avoid people, they live a nomadic life. And then we also have a group of people who have hierarchies, in the sense like they pass down their hierarchy, their class from generation to generation. Among the Orang Ulu, some group are like that. Um, so even within this Dayak group, we're also different. The way we think, our expectations are also different.
Right. In fact, as you were saying, I was just getting reminded of all those, coffee table photo books one sees in airports of indigenous people. They're like usually I think it's like something that's a spillover of the hippie days, that because it's usually the same trail also people are following, and they're fascinated with the same kind of things, and they keep coming out with the same that colonial gaze keeps getting keeps sort of adapting to times as well. And but I think now with the information technology, as you were saying, with YouTube and things like that, yeah, things have certainly changed quite a lot. Even in India, we can see that things are turning around finally. But what do you think of this thing that ultimately, like many writers like you, you write in English, and that can be said to be the colonizer's language, or
Mm,
maybe in Odisha's context, when an indigenous person writes in Odia instead of
mm,
their
mm,
language. So, I mean, I personally have no issues with it, but I know that this is a question that keeps arising in all our heads about
mm.
what is the way to how can one deal with this sort of a thing, because many people actually are they think that, okay, well, I will not write because I don't want to write in this language, although they are more comfortable in that language.
Mm. I think that that idea is self-isolating. I don't agree with it at all. I mean, we should all communicate. We should all tell our stories. We should all write our news in the language that we're most comfortable with. Um, for one, there are a lot of Iban youths nowadays who read in English. So why should I deprive them of my stories? You see. And the other thing is that for my generation particularly, we did not study the Iban language in school. For my niece's generation now, yes, they do. They do study it formally in school. So for me, it was Malay and English. That's it. Only these two languages. And I grew up in town. I mean, I had very little exposure to my original Iban language. So even though I know simple conversation words in the language, I can't write any good literature in Iban. I wouldn't even dare write a letter, to my great uncle in Iban, because I don't feel like I would know how to do it properly, even though I can speak the language and read in the language. And I feel that it's wrong to make writers feel guilty about this, because maybe I'm shameless, but I do believe that people who come up with those kind of arguments are trying to control are trying to control information from my culture from going out. You see, because for example, like me and yourself right now, we're speaking in English. I mean, if I only use my own original language and you use yours, um, even if Google can translate for us, it'll take a longer time for us to communicate. But we can do it directly because we speak a common language between us. And I feel like if you want people to become more aware of your culture, um, and you feel like you can, write well in a mainstream language, then by all means do it. Whether it's Chinese, Japanese, English, or Malay in this region, by all means do that. That doesn't mean that you're any less, in my case, any less Iban, for doing that. And I feel like it's also a very good way to those to reach out to those people who have been separated from their home, their original village. Because when you're separated out, you have no choice but to assimilate the mainstream language. You see. So just because you have moved out from your longhouse, that doesn't mean that you should be separated from your culture totally. Mm. At least that's my feeling on it. I feel no guilt writing in English. In fact, if people ask me about if people tell me to my face that I'm less Iban because I write in English, I'll just ask them back. If you're more Iban than me, what do you know? And then we'll compare facts. That's it. It's, I mean, I don't think. I think it's another way of controlling information. You know, it, I believe that the people who should interpret a culture are the people of those cultures themselves. The last thing I want is to write something in Iban and then have somebody from a different culture interpret what I write. I would hate that. You know, I wouldn't want that.
Right. Some network issues.
Mm.
I think I've lost your video from my side. Just one moment.
I can't hear you. I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Your microphone is off, I think.
Yeah, sorry. But I am unable to hear you properly. Actually, it's some connection problem is happening.
Oh, could you hear me clearly before this?
Yeah, I heard you. I mean, just the last bit got a bit, there's some delay. But I heard, yeah, the connection is going and come. Well, sorry, it's a bit disorienting for me. Just 1 minute. Yeah, so now as a uh, writer, it's you have dabble with different styles, different genres, and so many times I see there is this pressure on writers from indigenous communities to just write about indigenous culture and nothing else. But you have gone into science fiction, and what do you think about that? Like this pressure on people to just write in a particular way and uh, not explore what they themselves would like to write about.
Well, they're willing to pay me. For me, it's like if you're not going to pay me for following your advice, then I'm not going to follow your advice. Um, I mean, it's for me it's a little bit silly because the Iban culture can be modern too. So why can't I write a modern story? Why must it be always a story from the past? You know, a very simple example is the custom of bajalai or traveling. Even now, Iban men from longhouses would do it. They would, in fact, form work gangs, and they would go overseas. Maybe one or two of the fellows in the group would be able to speak English. So when they go to a work site overseas, whether it's an oil platform or whether it's a construction site, this person will communicate with the managers, and then he will give instruction to his work gang. We have quite a few work gangs in Julao. They would go out, like for 6 months every year, and then they'll come back with a big salary. I mean, those people have been to places like Texas. Singapore is a given. They've been to Iran. They've been to Thailand. They've even been to places like Papua New Guinea, where they have to build, certain buildings and all that. So these men are well traveled. They will work for half a year in an oil rig or in a tanker ship, and then they'll come back and they'll buy land, they'll buy big cars, or they'll fix their house. You know, that is part of the Iban culture, and it is still it has been going on for hundreds of years. Even my great grandfather, last time I've got a passport where he traveled to Palembang, which is now called Sumatra in Indonesia, to work. So that this sort of tradition has been going on for many generations, and I feel like this is something. This is a part of the culture that I can still move forward, into the future. Or maybe even write a modern story. I can write a science fiction story based on that, you know. So just because I'm writing from a different timeline or a different era, it does not mean that I have to stop being Iban. But I must admit, I also love other stories. In fact, I've maybe around the end of this year or early next year, one publisher will be publishing my next book, which is based on the Malay archipelago. When I was a teenager and I was studying history, I loved the history of the spice trade, especially during the Majapahit era. And I just study and I read those work obsessively for those periods, So I also write stories, based on my interests, because I'm not just I don't feel like I need to be, fixed on one thing and only that one thing. And I don't really believe in that sort of concept of specialization. It takes the joy out of your life. I mean, writers are paid so little. I mean, why should we make ourselves miserable by writing things that, we feel obligated to write instead of things that we enjoy to write?
True. So, I mean, this is just something outside of what topic is. But since you are living in the island of Borneo, uh, how, I just wanted to suddenly thought we must also talk about the haze problem, because I remember that like the fire and the haze is still happening. And like last year, I remember we were discussing this when the fire was there. And so is it still like a thing that is there, were there fire this year, or is it the season is going to come in a while?
Last year, it wasn't too bad. And this year, so far, we've experienced no haze. So I guess a lot of the restrictions in movement had sort of helped, stop what is going on. But I must admit, just because I haven't come across those news doesn't mean that it's not happening. It could just be happening at a level that doesn't affect us, so we don't put it in the news over here. And the other thing is, I must admit, I've been avoiding the news lately because there's been so much bad news. It was like, it does affect you. I mean, for one thing, you can't travel around, you can't move around, you can't meet your friends and all that. I mean, so on top of that, isolation, and you have all this bad news going on. You just after a while, you just feel like, oh God, this has to stop. So.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like the news is just to scare people into some sort of submission, like bombarding people with a lot of news about atrocity and horror. And so many times I see, I mean, for somebody like me, it's different because I come from a background of news and journalism. So we kind of get immune to it after a while. Not immune, but, somehow, yeah, maybe immune. I don't know what's the right word, but maybe things get normalized or we get conditioned. But yeah, certainly it seems. So that is where I often think that. Do you think that fiction writing can be used as a tool to talk about things that are important in a way that is not the way news does it? News has this thing of throwing things at people. It's like a bit of a shock and awe kind of a thing, which is almost like a military strategy.
Stories help in the sense like writers get to think through stuff. You know, it's different from the news because for the news, you're only interested in collecting facts, number one. And when you ask for opinions, the people who give you the opinion aren't given a lot of time to think through their answers or to check through their facts. I mean, it's quite rare to find someone who is a true expert in whatever they're speaking of. Because sometimes when I watch the news, they just approach a pedestrian person and then ask him or her questions, and this fellow will answer straight away. You know, it's different when you ask an expert. Then of course, I feel like the news will be more relevant then. But most of the times, when journalists are on the street, they'll just ask any pedestrian to pass by, and pedestrians who are willing to talk. And usually these people would give a very general opinion. And I hate to say this, but maybe some of those opinions are also based on what they think the correct answer should be instead of their honest opinion. So in a sense, I feel like it may actually, generalize things too much, or try to or make some kind of acts of intolerance or acts of desperation as something that is foolish. For example, like sometimes you'll see protesters on the streets, throwing stones or water bottles at the police, and then pedestrians will say like, "Oh, they're so foolish." I mean, what do they think a bottle of mineral water can do against a gun? But the thing is, that sort of create the idea that these rioters are foolish. But the reason that what nobody thinks about is, why are these people so desperate? If they have a choice, they would have gone a different route. That is what I believe anyway. And I think that in that sense, stories may help, because stories will help people empathize. Like, for example, they will explain why this fellow threw a water bottle, and then the question should be, why would the other side hit the other fellow to until he's hospitalized? I mean, how do you react to a bottle of water? How much violently can you react against a bottle of water? I mean, this is sort of those age-old arguments that have been going on for generations and generations. And as far as I can see, we have not found a solution to this yet, even in this generation. So maybe stories can help in the sense like, if more people start to understand why someone would be desperate enough to throw a water bottle against a gun, maybe then, when the worldview change, the way that we treat different sides will be different. I mean, that's what I believe that stories can do. But of course, that will also depend on whether the readers are willing to accept the stories or not. You see, because most readers will come in with their own biases and with their own discriminations, and they'll say like, "Oh, I don't want to read about this, because it's about people who are always rioting, So, I mean, a very obvious, a very close example would be like the concept of prostitution. I mean, when you talk about it in any culture, people will say like, these women are wrong, these women are bad. But nobody really wants to understand, why these women are doing what they did. Like sometimes I would be watching a documentary about, I remember one time watching a documentary about young girls, who got pregnant when they were still in their teens. And one of my friends said, "Why are you watching something like this? Those girls are also immoral." But the thing is, how can you say that a child would know how to? I mean, you won't even allow a child to vote. you know. So how can you say that it's the child's fault if she gets pregnant out of wedlock? But these are some of the things that we still can't understand even in this day and age. And I'm hoping that through stories, you know, we would slowly start to understand. I'm not going to say that I understand because I've never experienced it in my own life, you know. Um, so I wouldn't be able to write those kind of stories. And I feel like it would be wrong for me to write because I don't understand everything that goes into the decision or the choices that a child made, you know, even though all the adults around her are telling her that it's wrong. So someone, I hope that someone out there who has gone through it herself would be able to write something like that. I mean, it's the same with culture. It's the same with all kinds of philosophies or ideas. I believe that if you don't understand it, then you shouldn't be the one to write it. I mean, you can't write it based on some sort of uh, consensus that society has around an idea, you know. And I feel that it's wrong. And a lot of misappropriation, misunderstandings happen because people think that just because it's a consensus, it's right. Just because this idea, this is how everybody thinks, this is how I should write it. No, I believe that that shouldn't be the case.
Right. True. So, uh, one thing I find in your writing, like from the book Ivan Dreams, is that you are very unapologetic and about what you're writing, and there is sort of defiance in that. What I wanted to ask you is, or talk about, is very often one sees that when it's an outsider's gaze, then as you just what you talked about right now, there's more of dwelling on the victimhood of people, and very often people's suffering or oppression is turned into a kind of a glorified sketch of victimhood,
Hmm.
and that somehow feels like a violence by itself, to recreate victimhood in a graphic manner without as you just said, maybe about the little child, not getting that. So here, what I want to like, not in that sort of an example, but with your books, like this, the way you are, talking about your characters without necessarily turning them into, and nobody's really a victim, or even the hero has, is like a very human sort of a person, and it's a very human sketch portrayal, rather than just diminishing somebody into either a victim or a larger than life hero. And even if the hero is there, but I mean, from what I read, it's like there are all these nuances, and all these of course literature has these things, I'm not denying that, but my concern is about this glorification of victimhood, uh, particularly from the colonial gaze, and when they're
Hmm.
looking at ethnic groups or indigenous communities. What do you feel about that?
I think I write like that because that is how I like to read my stories. Um, I mean, I have been told that my stories have too little emotions, in the sense like um, it, like what you explained. It's like there is too little anxiety, there's too little angst, as they call it. But then um, my culture is very pragmatic. I mean, we don't really go into all those emotional stuff. It's like if you have something to do, then you go ahead and do it. I mean, if you don't have anything to do right now, then you do something. You know, you have to make something, whether it's a basket or it's tiling in the fields. You make something. You don't just sit around and mop all day. Um, we our culture is quite pragmatic. So even if I wanted to, I can't write a strong emotional character for my characters. I mean, I can write about them worrying about certain problems, but I can't make them dwell in it because that is not how we deal with problems. We don't deal with problems by dwelling on it. um, if we want to explore a problem, for example, like if we have an accusation against someone, then we will call a meeting and get the whole long house to come and judge between us. That is what we'll do. Um, Maybe that is also an issue for a lot of people about indigenous writing, because for indigenous cultures, I mean, we haven't been brought up. I think those ideas of victimization from a first world kind of situation, you know, because for most everyone else, people are just struggling. They're just struggling to survive, and when you're struggling to survive, you don't think about, oh, this hurt or that hurt, or this is unfair or stuff like that. What you do is when you are really really in that very bad situation, the best way to survive is to count your blessings. And I think in in most, I mean, in my style of writing, that is what I do, because I feel like that is how we do it in our culture here. I mean, if life is hard, then you look at your family, like you count your family and say, oh, everyone is healthy, so life is good. You don't think of life as hard just because you're struggling to get a house, or you're struggling to buy a bike or car. That is not how people from indigenous cultures think. We just think about what we have and what we can do with what we have. you know Maybe in that sense, maybe that's why Iban Dream was written that way, because even though Bujang's life was hard, but because he's a pragmatic person, he doesn't go into all those um, emotional spirals about this or that idea, because I feel like those emotional spirals are more of a modern problem, because we have a lot of times on our hands and we compare our lives to each other on Facebook. So we experience all those ideas of victimization and all that. But in um, in the old days, as far as I can remember it, everyone make do with what they have. Everyone tried to make the best of with everyone tries to do the best with whatever they have at the moment. So maybe that's why you don't see a lot of victimization stuff inside there.
Can I just come from the door for a moment?
Yeah, please. I need to do
Because it's
something.
going to. Friends, just hold on for a moment. Very sorry. There's somebody at the door. Yes. So anybody there, we have about 7 to 8 people who are watching us live. Of course, this gets recorded and goes, and it will be there on YouTube. So most people will
Mhm.
be watching it later as well. This is our friend Bipul, who sends love for this statement of yours. And if anybody else also would like to ask something, they could write in the message box. Uh, well, this is uh, just my own curiosity was to know about uh, Iban culture, and from the very little that I witnessed, uh, there's so much to know, and there's a long history that's not been written much. We probably know only what has been written more about the. I think he was British, James Brooke,
Yes, he was.
right?
Mm. Yeah.
But apart from that, we see. I mean, we know that okay, Borneo, and so there's this whole kind of, you know. There's so much of information about this very generalized. Like Borneo is such a huge, it's like it's like 7 times, 5 or 6 times the size of Orissa, for people
Mhm.
who are watching to get an idea. So that's like nearly like 1/3 of India or something like that, maybe a little lesser than that. But yeah, it's really huge, and it's one of the world's biggest islands. And it's always like the whole Dayak identity is kind of snowballed into one Dayak identity. And uh, so in that also, how does it, like, without like without really alienating oneself from one's neighbor, one
Mhm.
still like, because in India we see that very often, even like people like us, when you're trying to bring people together, we end up trying to put all identities into one, and not have that respect of the you know of different communities and different cultures. So what has been your experience with that, of having the Iban identity, you know
Oh, we keep ourselves quite distinct from each other. I mean, from the very beginning, everyone is quite aware of what their culture is. I think a large part of it is because we were all quite aggressive. The different tribes, I mean, um, so we do try to stand out. And when the people in Sarawak were first introduced to politics, I mean, we do elect representatives based on race, you know, um, and we do put them into the higher offices. And so from even from the time of the Brooks, we were all quite aware of our different ethnicity, and we don't try. We do come together to discuss issues like, for example, like where to put a new fort, where to put marketplaces and all that. But the culture and the language has been quite distinct um, for a long, long while. And then around the 60s, when Sarawak joined to form Malaysia, um, we've also had representatives um, who would who would approach who would collect all the people together, the different, like different groups. You elect your representatives, and then this group will elect their next representatives, and then they would all come together, and then they will decide on what sort of costume they should wear. They should show themselves as, So even if the different longhouses wear different costumes, but on a national level, everyone wears a particular costume to represent their ethnicity. So the Ibans have been quite aware about all these things since the colonial times. And I think partially it's because a lot of the, I wouldn't say a lot, some of the Iban elders have learned to write in alphabets. So they do produce stories in Iban using alphabets. And they do produce books. And around 1958, the British government, I believe, formed something called the Borneo Literature Bureau. So that establishment did publish quite a number of local books in the local language. So in that sense, Sarawak was quite blessed because we do have a lot of these people who try to encourage us to write in our language, And so from the start, the identity was formed since the 1960s. Yeah, our identity was pretty strongly formed. Would love to know about how usually their bringing is. What's so powerful to hear? Can deny me. Yeah, even women are usually quite strong in the traditional sense because I believe that it's partly because men used to travel in the past. They would be traveling for war expeditions or they'll be traveling for work, and sometimes they'll be gone for years. So the women are left in charge of the longhouse. I mean, it's not written in rule, but even in my own home, for example, the main matriarch last time was my grandmother, not my grandfather. And even in my home, the matriarch is my mother, not my father, not even when he was around. So even in my sister's home, she's married to an Iban man. She's the boss. She tells him what to do. She makes the final decision on everything. So it's quite, I mean, it's sort of, I would say that it's a role that is imposed on women. It's just that Iban women tend to be pretty aggressive. Yeah, I mean, we are expected to be aggressive. If you look at our costumes, the original costumes, like the one that my grandmother used to have, she had those, what do you call that? A sort of corset made of rattan and copper wires and rattan. And the whole ensemble is something like 20 kgs, 20 kilograms. And that is considered pretty light in those days. So women from the past are strong farmers. So they tend to be quite aggressive. And also another thing is that during my grandmother's generation, only women were allowed to plant paddy seeds. Because men hunts, whether it's animals or whether during wars, men were hunters. So they were considered as not being able to give life to the seeds. So women would plant the paddy seeds. So if a man wants to have warm cloth to wear at home and rice to eat, in the evenings, then he must show, proper respect to a woman.
Wow. That's quite something. Great. So, Avipsha, I hope got the answer. And well, we've been talking for an hour, and I hope you're not too tired. But if anybody has any more questions, then maybe. Well, so we have 8 people watching. Okay. Yeah. So that's quite interesting. Like, the way I mean, modern culture with, or maybe, colonial culture, it's stemmed out of patriarchy and this thing of dominating resources and controlling resources and capturing and all that sort of
Mhm.
is more of a patriarchal thing. And I think it's okay. We have got a question from Bipul. He wants to know.
What stories do I plan to write next? For my next novel, I would really love to write a science fiction. Um, I don't dare say what it would be about yet, because I don't know whether I'll be able to do it. But it's something that I've been planning to do for quite a while. On the other hand, I would also like to continue writing historical fiction, and this time I would like to write about a Malana woman. I've been meaning to do so for quite a few years, but one thing led to another. And I hate to admit it, but all these movement restrictions have been, you know, pulling me down. Like usually, if I want to write a story about a particular ethnic group, I would have liked, to visit a museum or to go to a village, or to go to the seaside and to try to experience those places and see those things, because I find that I get a lot of my inspiration from objects and from sceneries. So because I couldn't move around, every time when I try to write, it sort of pulls me down, because one of the worst thing a writer can experience is that you feel you don't have inspiration for doing something. I mean, that is one of the worst feelings you can have as a writer. I mean, there are a lot of things, a lot of footages, a lot of photos that you can see online, but it's different because you don't feel it on your skin. I mean, you don't visit a place, you don't taste their food. So it it's been really hard lately to try to write something, because you're stuck in at home, and all you experience is the home. So I mean, a lot of people think that a writer's job is just to sit in front of a desk and type and type and type. Yes, that's what we do, but before we can do that, we also need to experience our environment. And nature has always been a very has always played a very big role, for me. And being unable to move around, being unable to experience things, because of all these travel restrictions, it's been really hard on me, as a writer. Yeah. So I've been doing a lot of reading this past year. I've been reading and reading and reading all kinds of foolish stuff. The more foolish it is, the more I enjoy it, especially those that are written by teenagers, those stories online written by teenagers. I absolutely adore them, because maybe they will be my inspiration one day, because the way children think is of what they think the adult world is quite, it's quite fascinating in its own way.
That's true. Well, I'll admit I have done a lot of that myself, watching all kinds of videos on YouTube that I think I would have not watched otherwise. But yeah. And also, I discovered TikTok late, and I think TikTok is banned in India, but
Uh-huh.
I find TikTok videos on YouTube and I watch them. So that's,
Yeah. But I
well, I
think it's
just,
rather sad though to get
yeah.
inspiration from that, when I mean, I know that in your case as well as in mine, we get our inspiration from outside. Like me, I love going to exhibits. I love going to art galleries and museums because I feel like I've stepped into a different time zone. So I mean a different era, and it's always nice to be able to experience these things, or maybe even visit a home with a lot of antiques. Because it's the atmosphere that I need to write my stories. Mm. Because stories, you need to be emotionally involved when you write stories. You can't just write stories just because you have an idea. It needs a lot of emotional involvement. Mm. At least I need a lot of emotional involvement. I can't just write a story just because it's a good idea. I need to feel emotionally connected to it. Mm.
Uh, so I just remembered. Uh, well, this is just a trivia question, or just out of curiosity. There have been some findings of Buddhist relics in Sarawak.
Oh yeah, in a place that they call Bongkisam. It's near Santubong. Mm.
In a
But
cave.
I've been looking forward to that exhibit for many years, and it's supposed to be ready last year, but because of the restrictions in Malaysia, I mean we can't. The museums are still closed. So that's a huge disappointment. In fact, the my next novel that's coming out is based on Bongkisam because I was so inspired by the story.
Oh,
When I read the articles and I saw the maps, and there was one time I went to look at the exhibit, and it was a small exhibit, just like one stand, one corner like that, and that was like perfect. Yeah. So I managed to finish my story and to send it off after I visit that small exhibition at the temporary museum. But that was like 2 years ago. Yeah. So I would love
great. Looking.
to visit these places again.
It's on the coast. Is was it like a shipping, like a coast, like a port town? This place.
Mm, well, during the time of the spice trade, there has been quite a number of colonies along rivers,
Along
river
rivers.
deltas especially, because they can't really build their towns at the coast. They have pirates, so usually they'll build their colonies about 2 or 3 miles away, maybe even one day's travel from the river mouth. Um, so Santubong is quite. It's about an hour or so away from the coast. Mm, yeah. But I'm really looking forward to what they found there because I have read some articles about it, but that's the most I've seen. I mean, I can't even go out and buy a book about it because I don't even know what title to look for, where to look for them. Um, yeah, I'm looking I'm looking forward to travel restrictions being lifted because I would love to go back to Kuching and to look for materials again.
Well, yeah, I really hope that happens. It's been quite a thing.
Hmm.
Great. Is there anything else that you would like our audience to know?
Hmm, no, I don't think so. Maybe if you have questions, you can continue to put them up on the YouTube comments, and then I'll go visit and try to answer them as best as I
Oh
can.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
In fact,
Because
yeah.
I would really want to see more indigenous writers coming out. I know that a lot of focus is now on things like art, on things like music, but for stories itself, yeah, I would really love to see more indigenous writers coming up.
In fact, Golda has a very amazing YouTube channel, and there where she kind of has it's like tips and tutorials on writing for young indigenous writers. So uh, I would really I watch that very religiously and learn a lot from it. It's very good for everyone. Uh, I've not put up the link here, but I had put it up on Facebook. I don't have it handy. Let me see if I can just find it. Yeah. Yeah, this is so this is Golda's YouTube channel. A lot of videos are there which are very really like a lot to learn, and I would recommend it to everyone who wants to write or even otherwise.
I'm feeling guilty now. I haven't put up a new video in a while.
Well, the ones that you have put out are, they're worth visiting a few times, because that's what I have done, and every time it's something new, and it's really helps. Yeah, and yeah, in fact, I'm also hoping that very soon we have some Indian publisher, bringing your books to India.
Oh.
Really look forward to that. Because I bought this when I was there, and actually, yeah, after the Kalimantan film, the Palankara Film Festival, and after that, I thought I would get it in India, but I somehow thought it would be available in India, but it's like the other ones, and yeah, so I hope it's some publisher, prints it for Indian readers. Okay, so I'm very bad at wrapping up things and concluding, and it's always like an even with my films, I can never figure out the endings.
Oh, it's okay. Thank you so much for having me then.
Great, it's been such a pleasure to an honor to have you with us, and hope to have more discussions actually in the future. I mean, after a while, I mean, we think of some new things and get back to talking.
Yeah, that'll be great. Yeah, I look forward to that.
Great. Thank you, Golda.
Okay. Okay, goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, friends. Bye bye.